Um,
It is 10 o'clock. It's time for us to get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Henry County Chamber of Commerce Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee's monthly community dialogue. I am Carolyn Frazier, and I am the chair of that committee. I want to read, if you would allow me to read the mission and the purpose of the DEI committee for the chamber. So the mission is to serve as a voice for the business community, to provide quality service and programs that meet the needs of members, improve the economic environment of the community, and create a legacy of leadership for our future. And the purpose of our committee is to promote the value and power of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our community, to support and develop talent, resources, and business opportunities necessary to elevate minority businesses and employees in an increasingly competitive global marketplace. So again, welcome. I'm Carolyn Frazier, and I would like to introduce my co-moderator, who is Christy Tuning, and she is the Member Engagement Coordinator at Central Georgia EMC, and she is also the immediate past chair for our Chamber of Commerce. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Today we're going to talk about Women's Equality Day and what Women's Equality Day is, and kind of put our special spin on that. Women's Equality Day is actually August 26th. And that is the celebration of the 19th Amendment for the women's right to vote. So as this National Day of celebrating the importance of women's suffrage movement, it has continued to work to secure and expand women's equal rights till today. So we want to honor that day by bringing you women in Henry County who continue to break barriers in their chosen fields.
Okay, so let me introduce these phenomenal women who will be joining us this morning. We have Miss Dana Lemon, who is a funeral director at WD Lemon and Sons Funeral Home, and she is also a board member for the Georgia Department of Transportation. She is the first female and the first African American to hold a position on this board, so welcome, Dana. We have Michelle Amara, who is the CEO of our wonderful SCB TV and video marketing, and she is the owner, CEO and owner of SCB TV, and so welcome, Michelle. Shay Dixon, who is the president of Allegiant Logistics. She is a carrier logistics entrepreneur, which is not something that we see a lot of women doing, so welcome, Shay. And we have Gloria Easler. Gloria, did we lose Gloria? Okay, she will probably be back. Gloria Easler is with Easler Construction and Renovations, LLC, and she is also the owner and past president of the Atlanta Home Builders Association South Metro chapter.
Well, so welcome, ladies. Welcome. We're going to ask some questions, and just on this first question, if you will also kind of tell us how you came into the positions that you were in, your chosen career field. But the question that I have is, when you joined your particular workforce, were there women before you that were in the workforce? And what do you think of when you think about those women in the workforce before you? And so just tell us a little bit about what you do and what kind of influences you had from women. And we'll start with Dana.
Of course you will. So my situation is a little unique in the sense that ours is a family business. My mother and father started this business back in 1959. So we've been serving the Southern Crescent for about 62 years now. And my mother works right alongside my father. So I've always seen women in funeral service, not necessarily as licensed funeral directors, even though she was licensed, but definitely doing the behind the scenes work and working the services and everything. Our industry is has traditionally been very male dominated, but over the last 10 years, more and more women are coming into this industry, so much so that we're seeing the trend that a large majority of the new funeral directors are actually women. It's very interesting because I have a circle of girlfriends, women in Metro Atlanta, who we have bonded over the last 15 or 20 years or so. And most of us are leading our family-owned firms or the firms that we work at. And these are women in their 40s and 50s and 60s who either came into the business because of the family or came into the business because of other relationships. And we are all in the leadership positions right now, even though there are quite a few men who still work at the firms. The leaders in so many of these large firms in and around Metro Atlanta are actually women. I didn't necessarily see a lot of women growing up in the industry. I just saw my mom, and she did what she did, and it was easy to come in and model what she did because she was a very kind person, a very patient person, and really worked well to make sure that the families were comforted during their times of grief. That's the funeral home side of my life. The transportation side of my life is very, very similar. I came into this position as the first woman elected to serve on the Georgia Department of Transportation Board. Prior to that, there were no women who were elected to serve. At the time that I was elected, and for those of you who don't know, we're actually elected by members of the General Assembly. Ours is the only state agency board that is not appointed by the governor. Every other state agency board is appointed by the governor. The Department of Transportation Board is actually elected by members of the General Assembly who serve within the congressional district, excuse me. So when I was elected in 2003, at the age of 39, the median age of the men on that board was about 72, 74. There were quite a few men who were in their 80s on the board at the time. And so not only was I the first woman that they had to deal with, I was the youngest person that they had to deal with. In fact, on the floor where the board met, there wasn't even a women's bathroom. So I had to go to a completely different floor to even use the bathroom. There were not a lot of women to model after, so you just had to figure it out as you went along and sort of wedge in where you fit in and chart your own path. Since then, we've had 3 other women join the board, and so there are a total of 4 of us on this 14-member board right now. But being the first is definitely an interesting. So both of those are very male-dominated industries that I came into, one about 25 years ago and the other about 18 years ago.
Wow, thank you. How about you, Shay?
Yeah, so wow, I'm just inspired by that alone. Transportation is not easy. And so just being the first one to forge the way, that's awesome, Ms. Dana. So similar story as just coming straight out of high school, working in a manufacturing facility. I landed in transportation just on a whim. I didn't intend to. I got an office opportunity. And once I started working the office opportunity, I saw where there were some challenges that could be changed by better process. So I just went straight in and tried to implement process and make change that way. I started working for a freight brokerage in New Jersey. That's where I'm from. And I learned so much about the industry and just providing transportation services. And I also realized that it's super male dominated. I was in a leadership role and I got asked to bring the team coffee a lot. Although I was in a leadership role, the other leaders still looked at me as though I was an admin. Even with the larger book of business, more knowledge, it didn't matter. I still was asked to bring coffee a lot. So when I started my own thing, I wanted the opportunity for other women like me to show up, make their way, make their path, and to do it without having any restraints because they were women. So I started our freight brokerage, Allegiant Logistics. And in the past 15 years, I've learned a lot about just standing on my own 2 feet, being confident in the woman that I am, and then empowering other women to do the same.
Thank you. How about you, Michelle?
So my story, I guess we all have our own individual stories. Mine's a little different. So whenever I started on this adventure with SC, who we were, several years ago, it actually was owned previously by a woman. And I was working for a company that the partners owned equal shares. It was an event management company in SCB TV. And it was really this amazing opportunity that God kind of put in front of me. I'd always kind of had a passion for the community and serving and helping businesses grow and connect. It had always been a passion of mine. So when the opportunity came for SCB, it was kind of like, do I do this? Do I not do this? But I'm one of those jump first kind of people, which can get me in trouble. It definitely has its pros and cons to it. But that definitely started the adventure with the SCB TV. And I definitely would not have even have made the transition in my career path if it wasn't for my pastor and my parents and the amazing mentors, entrepreneur mentors that I've had in my life throughout my, entire life. But I think where, women in the industry, where it transitioned the most, as I said, SCB TV was previously owned by a woman. So I had kind of seen, that example and known from that. But I guess when we made the transition from being the local cable television station to an independent or a full service video production, that's whenever you see a lot of the change in the gender leadership. And video productions definitely dominated in the male industry. I might not be the one behind the camera, but we've got a great team here, and just, surrounding myself with the right people and a team that can definitely support and have the same mission that I have has been something that's definitely led to the successes with SCB for sure. I don't run into a lot, with women, and I don't meet a lot of women in video production. Maybe photographers, but in video production. So it's been great to be able to connect in that way.
Awesome. Thank you. Miss Easler, we're talking about where you've drawn your professional inspiration. If there was another woman that inspired you to get into the industry that you're in, and just kind of tell us a little bit about your story of where you came from to come into the industry that you're in, and if you had any women there to inspire you.
Okay, my computer went out totally.
Okay.
And just looking at everybody, I think I'm probably maybe the senior member here. I can't think, well, okay. First of all, I was one of 5 girls in the family of 6, and my brother being the oldest. In my generation, the emphasis was always on the male in the family trying to get, his education first. And I think the 5 of us girls just learned to be very independent, and, very proud of all my 4 sisters, which they're, all my role models. And I haven't lived in Texas in over 40 years. But just to fast forward, since college, and I went to an all women's university, not because I wanted to be around women, but because it was the lowest costly institution at the time in Texas, and that's why I went there. But so fast forward, when I married my husband, and we ended up in only 6 months in Texas. And then because he's an industrial engineer and was in the apparel industry, we moved a lot in the first 12 years prior to moving to McDonough. So in all those experiences, which he worked in across the border in Mexico, and we lived in Puerto Rico for a while, and coming from a Hispanic background, I, was always around a lot of diversity, for one thing. But when we moved to Haleyville, Alabama, there were only 2 main industries in the town, and that was mobile home industry and the apparel industry. And my husband and I sort of had different roles, because he worked with a lot of women and had worked with a lot of women over the years being in apparel. But I ended up working with a lot of men in mobile home industry. I mean, it was dominantly staffed male. There were maybe only 5 secretaries in the office. I was hired like a secretary, but they really didn't know where to put me at the time. And 6 months later, I became a floor plan coordinator, which has nothing to do with design. It has to do with wholesale financing. And I worked for 5 years, and this was before computers, before sales, no FaceTime. I primarily worked with sales managers who were all men in 5 different plants. And I reported to the vice president of finance, who later became the CEO of the company, and I still reported to him. And it was really those 5 years that I can say that it really helped me learn how to work with men, for men. And I put down a lot of notes about what it meant. But then making the transition to McDonough, my husband's originally from Georgia and grew up in the construction business. And he saw an opportunity for us to maybe get back into what he liked to do. But he had what we call the regular paying job. And so he put me out there as the general contractor for the first house that we built in Henry County. And it was probably a year before some of the subcontractors even knew that he was the boss, because he would come in at noon sometimes in his business attire, and they thought he was the banker. One of the things that my husband, we were talking about this the other day, because I was asking him, I said, do you remember what you told me when we started the business? And he said, not really. And so then we started talking, and he said, well, he said, primarily I told you all that because I didn't want the men to take advantage of you. And growing up in the construction business himself, working in the environments that he worked, he's really been my best teacher. And so there was one thing that he always said. He says, when you're on the job, he said, use the word I. Don't say you've got to check with your husband or this or that. He said, be assertive, but don't be condescending to anybody. And that was one of the main lessons I think that I've learned. And over the years, I'm not intimidated by working around people that have bigger titles than I do. I've learned to know my worth and my value. But because this is the topic of diversity and women in business, I think that growing up as a minority, and women were certainly a minority, and especially for me, I'm in my mid 70s. And even here in Henry County, I've seen the changes. When we first started working in our construction business, the labor was Black. And then it went to Hispanics 10 years later. And so my being female and my being of Hispanic background has actually been like an advantage for us in our business. One, learn to relate to the workers. And when you're in construction, you realize that, it takes so many people. People always use that word about it takes a village. Not one of us on this program can get to where we are without a lot of support. And I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. But anyway, because I was my husband and I sort of changed roles. After that first year, I remember that Easter weekend, he came in and he said, well, I gave notice. And I said, what do you mean you gave notice? He said, well, I quit my job. He said, we're either going to do this full time or not at all. And I had really reached my capacity with having 6 houses that we started that first year. So I was no longer the general contractor, but I've always been a part of the business. And of course, I became a realtor, and we've had a partnership over the years. We've sort of taken reverse role now, where I used to be the front person and meeting with the buyers. And he would only talk with the buyers towards the end of a transaction. When we have to switch to home improvement, he now is the one that has to be face to face with the customers. So he's been a big source for me as far as learning how to maneuver. And because I was the one that was more out in front, I became involved in the Greater Atlanta Home Builders Association, the Metro South chapter. And I was in there for 3 years on the leadership team. And then I was actually supposed to go from secretary to vice president. But the person that was ahead of me had a illness. His wife was ill and he had to drop back. So I was fast forwarded from secretary to the president of the Metro South chapter in 2007. Of course, I didn't know, nobody knew that was the beginning of the housing fall. But again, in that year, I worked primarily with men. I was not the first female president, but I was the first of Henry County. I was the first Hispanic female. And part of my responsibility was go to all the board meetings in Atlanta. Again, maybe a couple of women were at those board meetings, but the years in the mobile home industry, the years working on-site in construction, working with vendors and subs, I mean, I was prepared for that role. And from a Christian background, I think that God is always preparing us for the next role. Sometimes we don't realize what it means at the time. We want to go faster sometimes in our careers than what, than we're allowed. But I think that everything that I've done in the past has helped me. And then as a member of the real estate industry, I was very involved for over 30 years, Women's Council of Realtors. And one of the main purposes there is to create leaders. And I certainly had a lot of education. I'll sort of wrap this up, fast forward. I'm currently I'm past president of McDonough Women's Club. And I think to further in business today for women, especially, you need to get involved in community groups, go to business meetings, go to networking groups. That's where you make connections. And I think connections is what it's all about in business today. That's sort of the short version.
Thank you, Gloria. I'm astounded and very humbled by the diversity of background that you all have, but there's definitely a common thread, and I appreciate that. And Gloria, the last thing that you just said about being involved in the community, everyone on this screen has shown that, because I know all of you through the community, not just because you're here. So that's pretty amazing. So I have a question. And I'm going to ask Shay first. What is the one thing that you wish you knew as a career businesswoman? What is the one thing that you wish you had known when you were first starting out in your career?
Honestly, the first thing I wish I knew would be that every action, everything I say, every time I go into a room, the way I enter that room, the way I communicate my thoughts and what we stand for as a business and as a business professional, that it would either be it would be used against me or for me, right? So I had to make sure that I could articulate exactly what value I brought to any partnership, any deal, any client. And no one tells you how to do that, right? No one explains how to not only show up confidently when you're walking into a room full of men mostly, especially in transportation, where the moment I speak, everyone's on their phone, right? They're not even listening to what I'm saying. So how do I recommand that room? I wish that someone would have taught me how to command a room and command respect without being overly aggressive, right? It took a while for me to learn how to stand my ground and communicate, especially in the middle of adversity, right? It's okay when you're getting an opportunity and things are going really well, but when things go south, how do you still show up and are able to communicate eloquently without sounding or seeming aggressive or taking a back seat and allowing people to take advantage of you and your business? So I really wish someone would have guided me through that. But thanks to YouTube and people I've met at the chambers, and then real life situations, I've been able to learn it, but I wish I would have had that to help me just in some situations where I didn't communicate or stand up for myself well enough because I couldn't articulate what I needed or what I would not do from a business standpoint.
Thank you so much for sharing that. What about you, Michelle?
I think definitely, something I wish I knew was something from the beginning was how to create a standard in which I had relationships with people. When I first came out of the gate, I was eager, I was excited, I jumped into everything and didn't really think about the standard that I should handle the relationships with to make sure that it was, received the same way. And definitely a lot with what, Shay said, we're, business professionals. We're an owner of our business. We're running our businesses, and we deserve the same respect as a man that's running a construction company or a man that's running a, IT company or whatever, not for in response to anybody, but I think, not learning how to demand a standard for the way business is held with me and in my communication and relationships with people, I think is something I wish I would have known. And that fine line between, as a woman, if we're too aggressive, then that's just looked as a bad thing. Like, how do we properly communicate what we're looking for without it, crossing the line and seeming too aggressive? I think are definitely two things that I wish I would have learned from the beginning, for sure.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
The one word, I wrote some notes thinking about this since I was asked, and this relates to what Shay and Michelle have alluded to, but didn't come out directly and say it. I think the word respect is the first thing that comes to mind. We as women have to respect ourselves first. And when you respect yourself, it needs to be manifested in the way you dress, the way you speak, and the way you appear to other people. Having worked, especially in the mobile home industry, because it was so male dominated, I learned that, there's, and this goes along with the Me Too thing, which has come up. If you're old enough and you worked in a business environment, you probably had some things that came up in your experience where men were a little bit too flirty with you. You as a person sometimes are very warm and wanting to be accepted. And, so sometimes, we can take things wrong. But one thing I learned in the mobile home business was that you had to shrug those flirtatious remarks off. They might consider it friendly, but the minute you start responding in the way that people, act towards you, then you're setting yourself up for situations. So I think this always stands in my mind because this had to do with real estate. In my first year of real estate, there was an associate agent that said to me, you need to lighten up. And I just took the remark and I thought, yeah, if I lighten up, then people start taking it wrong, So as women, that's one of the things that I think we've always had to be concerned about is how we respond to other people. And a lot of it is in how we dress. Like for say real estate, it's become very casual in the dress, and I think it's a little bit too casual. I know that sometimes we have to dress for the position that we're in. I notice Shay has like a polo on. If you're in construction or a type of business now, we sort of dress like the men sometimes. We're able to wear the polos and the khakis and be casual, but still professional. And you've seen it, I've seen it, too many situations where the women are not dressed appropriately. And it not only reflects on the women that are wearing the outfits, but then it reflects on the rest of us that are in that environment. So I can't say too much about the word respect because that is not just of ourselves, but the people that we work with, we have to have respect for them, from the lowliest janitor to, the CEO of the company. But it's all how we are perceived by other people.
Thank you, Gloria. I want to hear from you also, please, Dana Lemon.
I think it's interesting listening to Shay and Michelle. I was one of those lucky 60s babies who had a father who thought she was the world. And so most of my confidence and abilities came from because of my relationship with him. And so I learned very early on in life about eye contact, shaking hands, speaking your voice, meaning what you say and saying what you mean. Learn very early in life that it's okay to disagree with people and you can still work together. My dad taught me that from very early in life. So by the time I actually graduated from college, those traits were already in me. And so going into banking initially in a very male-dominated industry, and then transitioning from banking to funeral service and even transportation, I was blessed that those traits were already there. And so I think I have the opposite challenge that Shay and Michelle have. When I walk in a room, I know I'm in the room and they know that I'm in the room. I need to learn that softer side that they were talking about so that, it's not perceived as intimidation or anything other than confidence, because confidence is not something that I've had a challenge with. It may be the other side of confidence. And so Michelle and Shay, I may need y'all to counsel me on how to be that softer woman, because I do know the importance of being present in a space that you're not necessarily the majority of. In banking, I would often walk in corporate offices and corporate rooms, and it would be 6 or 7 white men and this young Black girl coming in the room, young Black woman coming in the room. And so when you have that experience, you have to be very sure of who you are and why you're there, and the significance of you being in the room, just like the significance of their being in the room. So I had to learn that very, very early in my career. So I may need to backtrack a little bit, Michelle and Shay, and learn that soft side, so that it's not quite so I won't say intimidating, but I do understand the importance of presence when you walk in a room and the confidence that you need.
Thank you. Michelle, I'll start with you on this one. As a female leader, what has been your most significant barrier in your career? And have you been confronted with gender-related roadblocks?
Gender-related roadblocks. I think the most, let me think about that for a second. So I think I've seen it most kind of in, relationships with other business owners in the community, maybe not being seen as equal in moments, and it might not be in relationships I have with the chamber, but in general relationships, the chamber is a small portion. I feel like there, the relationships are a lot stronger, but I definitely feel in other areas of my life in the relationship, there's definitely, I don't want to say the good old boy, but hey, all these business owners click together, you know what I mean? And it's kind of like a little click, and it's, if you're not like them, then maybe you don't fit in with it. And I've definitely seen that, and just learning to not be aggressive, and just like sit back, be a little more subtle, and just not worry about those areas, but to really just focus on what I'm doing and not focus on that. And everything definitely ends up, in the positive for sure.
But you, Miss Easler?
There were certainly, well, I don't know how to say this, certainly roles sometimes that I wondered if I was overlooked because of my being diverse. The first company I ever worked with after college was USAA. Again, it was a lot of women, but all male managers. And, you know, it took a lot to be promoted to managerial positions back in the 70s. And when you look at the latest statistics, there's still just a handful of CEOs that are in the 500 Fortune companies. So I don't, you know, even, well, and I'll take it back to mobile home industry. When things were changing, I actually did the work of a national credit manager. And I asked my VP of finance at the time, I said, why don't I get the title? I said, you know, because we had 5 plants, I never got to visit any of the other plants. And they said, because I was female. I don't think at the time my Hispanic background had anything to do with it, because we're actually dealing with companies in Mexico, and I did translation for them in correspondence. But they said it was because of travel. So, you know, in the back of my mind, I always thought, well, is that the real reason, you know? And maybe they did know something. I was female, and I would have to be dealing with the men in person, where I was dealing with the men, but over the telephone for the most part, except for the 10% that were there at the corporate office. So I think that was definitely one of those areas where they didn't give me the title. And in fact, what I did before I left, I asked for my salary to be raised. And they willingly did it, because I said, I want to go to the next company and be able to say that I made X number of dollars. I said, I think you owe me that. And, you know, it's always been said that if you go in to ask for a raise wherever you are, be prepared to leave, because, you know, if you don't, then they just think that, you know, they can bypass you again. So that was probably the experience that I remember the most. Being in construction or being in real estate now, I don't feel like I've been overlooked because of either one. Although when we moved here to McDonough in 1984, I was certainly a minority, not because of a woman, but, you know, being of Hispanic background. And I don't know what else I was going to say about that, but I don't feel that, and then of course the county has grown. I feel like I'm a minority again, you know, only because of the demographics that have changed. But I don't, I mean, there were probably situations where there were roadblocks, but sometimes you just have to ignore them and keep going on. I mean, I could have been an officer in the real estate association, but, you know, I feel like that time has passed me up. I don't need, I mean, I've had enough roles in leadership, and I'm really, I'm not on my last chapter, but I'm at that chapter where I'm slowing down. So I've learned to say no a lot better than when I used to, you know, feel like I had to do everything to be noticed or to feel accomplished, you know, that sort of thing.
That was really good, Miss Gloria, what you said about learning to say no. And that kind of goes back to that standard that I was talking about, you know, and knowing, you know, I had to learn that, you know, and it took me a couple of years and being overwhelmed several times, you know, to know that it's okay, you know, to say that, because sometimes, you know, we want to prove ourselves more because we're women, or because we're, you know, just now starting our business, or whatever it may be. And that has been definitely a powerful thing to know, that it's okay to say no, you know. So I appreciate you sharing that.
What about you, Shay?
So I think one of the challenges or barriers that I faced early on in my logistics career, when I was actually in corporate, was being looked over for opportunities, not necessarily because I was the minority. So I'm a double minority because I was always the only woman and the only person of color, period. I was the only Black person. There, nobody else in my office was even Black. And when I first started, they were like, you're the first Black person to work here. It was, you know, like it was a major thing for them, right? And so what came along with that is that I experienced more roadblocks as a woman, because I often in the transportation industry, because we're dealing with a bunch of men who have wives or people at home caring for those that they love, they often felt that I should have someone at home caring for the people that I love. So because I had children, they didn't understand. My son has epilepsy, and when he first got diagnosed, my company was not understanding at all. They wanted me to still keep the 70, 60 hours a week, pace that I was doing, working around the clock, and I couldn't do it. And so a lot of opportunities were often tossed out to me as, we would totally give you this opportunity, but we know you have kids and you're not going to be able to do it, such as this man. And there were a lot of women who were top earners at our freight brokerage, but because they were women and, they were newly married, they were like, oh no, you're going to get pregnant soon, so we can't deal with you being out for that time period. And they were very honest and candid about it. And I was like, hey, does anybody else see that this is wrong? Like, this isn't right. And everyone was so used to it. This is how the industry is. This is how they've always done it. And I wasn't, I wasn't okay with that. So that is a huge reason why my business was started, because I need to be I can work from a laptop and internet from anywhere, whether I'm at the doctor's office with my children, at a soccer game. I could be at PTA meeting if I need to check in, I can do that. And I want the flexibility to do that. And I want to give other women the flexibility. Now in my current role as CEO, I see that the roadblocks in the transportation industry, especially here in Georgia, is that, just like Michelle said, it's a boys network, right? I've learned how to golf. I've learned how to play roulette. I've learned how to play poker because I want to be able to sit down. These contracts for transportation and logistics providers are not over the phone. They're not in a conference room. These, a lot of these contracts or no bid contracts or opportunities, these are done, around the poker table, out golfing. And the challenge that I face is, one, being Black. So, a lot of time that's something I have to overcome already, but I'm relatable. So I get past that pretty easily. Being a woman is a whole nother thing. They're like, look, we want to have locker talk and we can't do that. We can't talk like that with you around. So a lot of times I can't get to the table or in the room to show them that, look, the way you guys are moving this freight right now is not the best way to do it. I have a better way. I have a solution. Just let me sit at the table and play cards or golf with you. So that's the challenges I've experienced as a woman just in transportation.
Thank you, Shay. How about you, Dana?
So on the funeral service side, of course, there are some gender-related challenges. Ours is part of our business is very physical. We physically have to be able to do certain things. And I would dare say many men think that women they can't lift caskets, they can't lift bodies, they can't do the heavy lift that for many, many years men have done. For many, many years, you never heard of a woman being the embalmer for a funeral home, even though we're just as good as them. You just never heard of it. All you really saw women doing was meeting with families and doing the services, and maybe driving the limousines. Over the last 15 years or so, with the transition of more women in the industry, we've had to show them that we can lift bodies. We do know how to move heavy weight. We can do all the things that men have traditionally had to do or done in our industry when it comes to funeral service. Our embalmer here, our primary embalmer here at our funeral home is a woman, and she is amazing. She's absolutely amazing. And 20 years ago, I dare say, we would not have even consider hiring a woman to be our primary embalmer. But over the last, 10, 15 years, you realize that the skills necessary are not based on your gender. They're simply based on your ability. And so you look at that when it comes to funeral service. Of course, in transportation, when I first got on the board, the conversations were a little harsh. And Gloria, I did have to say something a couple of times because not only were they inappropriate for me as a woman, but they were inappropriate for me as a Black woman. And there were a few occasions where we were sitting around the table playing cards, Shay, and the conversation would get a little inappropriate, raunchy, if you would. And rather than leave, because it wasn't about me, rather than leave, I would just draw attention to the fact that, you know what, guys, that's not quite right, guys, it's not right. And they might continue the conversation, but they would not do it in my presence, which is all I really wanted. I still want to be able to play cards. I still want to be able to fellowship. I still want to be able to have conversations, casual conversations. But there's a way to do that in a business environment that's appropriate. And if you don't know any better, you can't do any better. But once you learn better, then you do better. And so I help them to learn better.
I think that is awesome, Dana, because you just pinpointed something that is so important, that in our journeys, we are educating others, men, right? People who aren't us. We're educating them, and they are learning and growing as well, because they have never had to think about, oh, I might need to, I might need to speak more respectfully. I might need to give this some additional thought. So you're bringing things into their consciousness that they may have never had to think about before. And so that's just personal growth for everyone. So
and not just with me as a board member, the things that they were doing that were inappropriate, they were doing around the support staff that we had. But because they were support staff, those women didn't feel empowered to say anything. And so they just put up with the disrespect that they were receiving. Today, it would be a lawsuit. But rather than go there, like you said, we have to educate and show them a different way. And for the women that were in the environment who saw what I would do or what I would say, I think it sometimes empowered them to realize, wait a minute, I can still do my job well, and not be disrespected. And so it's hopefully it had empowered them to speak up as well.
That is brilliant. That is brilliant.
Can I just add something here too?
Sure.
I think what, Shay and Dana, what y'all are saying about playing the boys' games, I'll just call it that way. I think today with volunteerism, very active, I guess, and I'll refer to Michelle, who's led us in the Henry County Networking Group. Like, I've never really gotten a sale as being a realtor when I went to those meetings, but I have met so many people outside of real estate. And that was one of the things that I started doing when the real estate, housing crash came. I mean, we got hit by the double whammy. I was a real estate agent and my husband building. And but it was at that point that I also realized, who are my friends going to be and who my contacts will be, if I get out of real estate. Are all my friends just realtors or builders? And so I started attending McDonough Women's Club for one, and I started going to the Henry County Networking Group, which is made of so many people in the community. But out of those relationships that have come out of Henry County Networking Group have also come a lot of nonprofit work. And I think in today's environment, you don't necessarily have to learn to play the golf or sit around the card table. There are other ways to get in touch with the men and other people in business that is non-threatening to women, or wherever your cultural background is. And that's one thing that I would recommend to anybody in this group. If you're not already part of a group like that, that is where you network. And speaking of Shay, are you involved with Hope White at all, or y'all are in the same type of business? Do you know who I'm talking about?
I do. Yeah. She's another chamber member and we have the same type of business. Yep. We both.
Okay. Well, I sat across from Hope at a chamber meeting a couple of years ago because I didn't go to any last year. And I'm just amazed at the fact that y'all are in that kind of business, although we have one of the biggest trucking companies, led by a woman, Marcy Bennett. But those are situations where you can meet the people that you need to connect with. And you may find out that you have the golf interest or the card interest or whatever. But that's just one way to overcome the feeling that you've got to do the boys' games, to be accepted. There's just so many other ways, to get ahead.
I appreciate that.
I am amazed at being a woman in business. There is such a spirit amongst women, and I don't want to be sexist, but there's such a spirit of collaboration versus competition. We do that really well. Just across in general terms, I feel like we, being, Shay talking about Hope, who I don't have the pleasure of knowing, but a collaborative spirit. We're in the same industry. Hey, let's put our heads together. Let's connect. Let's see how we can work together, benefit each other. And there is not such a spirit of competition amongst women. We can be competitive, but we all want to win. So I think that's awesome. I have a final question that I want to pose to everyone. And I'm going to start with Dana. What advice would you give to the next generation, the emerging generation of female leaders? And Dana, I'm asking you first because you and I had a conversation recently about a young lady. So that's your question, starting with you.
When it comes to funeral service, knowing your craft is the most important thing. Getting the education and knowing your craft and knowing your skills, and building the relationships early on. As I mentioned earlier, there's a group of us, and there's about 10 women in and around Metro Atlanta who are leaders at their funeral homes, leaders in their communities. And the bond that we share is, people marvel at the fact that all of us own funeral homes. And yes, we service the same general area, which is Metro Atlanta, and we service the same general population, but there is no competition. It's really collaboration. And so building those relationships early on will lead to success. Understanding that you can't possibly know it all, you can't possibly have seen it all, but together, when you work with others and collaborate with others, you can figure it out. And then on the transportation side, those relationships will matter. And Gloria, I appreciate that you saying that volunteering and service and working with men in that way also is another way to build those relationships. Throughout my professional career, I've served on many, many boards, volunteer boards, nonprofit boards. I'm serving on an education board, hospital board. Those are times you too can build those relationships. And I appreciate you saying that, Gloria. I forgot to mention that, because when you're in there in the trenches helping another cause that you both care about, then it takes the pressure off from that industry that you also both seem to be in, that you're in. And so I think it's important to build those relationships, but also to get the information, get the education, get the training, and don't hesitate when it comes to asking for help. People see asking for help as a weakness. I see asking for help as an acknowledgement that I don't know it all, but I want to know it all. And so I'm going to let you help me know it all, because I want to be excellent in my craft, not just good. I want to be excellent. I want to be able to serve people with excellence and perform with excellence. And so allowing people to help you get to that place will both build that relationship and accomplish that what you're trying to do, which is, of course, succeed in your business and your community.
Thank you. Okay, Miss Michelle, you're up next.
I'm like writing so many different notes here on what, advice for there's just so many different things that come in different areas and ways to look at it. But I think one thing is being confident in knowing what you bring to the table. I think it's important to know that, and that you have value not only as a person and as an individual, but you have value in who you are in your profession as well. And just being confident in that and not ever letting anyone else steer that. You are who you are, and being confident, in that individuality is its own power. I think something that's important too is to have women in your life that you can turn to. I know mine is like my mom and my grandmother, both of them. They were both entrepreneurs themselves. So they were always someone that I could bounce ideas off of and bounce things off of. And and like Dana said, asking for help. It's okay to ask for help, and to get the opinion of someone else, because your perception sometimes can be narrow if you know what goal you're looking for, but if I have feedback and bounce ideas off of, other women in the community, which I've done before, there's a lot of strong women business owners in this county. I wish there were more, but there are some really good ones that we can call on. And I feel like that the competition collaboration thing that you were talking about, Caroline, like I really feel like, the women in business that I know, I really feel like I could call them and bounce an idea off of them and say, hey, look, what are your thoughts on this? What's the way that we should do this? And I think there's definitely power in that. And that's all I'm going to say of my notes. I started walking here, but those were just a few, definitely.
Thank you. Ms. Shea, what about you?
So I would like to think that I am the next generation coming up. I'm a millennial, and so I've learned a lot just from being on this panel, right? Being at the table, listening to all of you. So I would tell everyone and give advice, the same advice I give myself. Get around wise leaders who can share their experiences. I know sometimes as millennials, we feel like things of the past are obsolete, and they are not. The wisdom that people who have been walking the walk, I'm about to celebrate my first year in business. And so someone who has 10, 15, even 5 years of business experience, we can learn from them and learn kind of the mistakes that they've made to kind of avoid those. I also think remaining with that forever student mind, that even after 10 years of business, there's still always someone that knows more than you. So I'm going into every room just trying to figure out what I can learn from everyone. And I've learned from all of you today. And then also just build your network. We joined the chambers to build our network, and I built my network before I needed my network. I didn't even know I had people in my network until I released my business that would change the trajectory of my business. And I didn't even know they were in my network that I just met at a chambers event. So that's my advice. And I thank you all for sharing. I've taken something from each one of your story and have been able to I'm going to apply it. I'm like Michelle, I've got my notes. So thank you for that.
Excellent. Ms. Gloria?
Okay, I'm going to reflect on when Dana started with about relationships. I was in new homes. My husband built the houses, and I sold them for over 20 years. And if you've ever known a new home agent, it can be very isolating. There was that phrase in real estate or construction that, sometimes, this is out of context, that, agents slept with their builders to get ahead. Well, I really did sleep with my builder, and it was very difficult because, my daughter could tell you that sometimes it was 24/7 of real estate and construction. And, but it can be very isolating for a new home agent. I think today it's changed some because of security and COVID and everything that we've gone through, the last 10 years. But if, there were people that would never have known me if I had not been active in the real estate association and became involved in the community. There were people that thought probably I was a lot more successful financially than what I was because I was out there all the time. But also I've mentioned the Women's Council of Realtors, which I did let my membership drop this year. And last year I got one of, the best recognition I've ever had. And it was a state recognition as the community person of the year. But I already mentioned, I'm sort of dropping some things, making space for other things. But the relationships that I met through the Women's Council of Realtors, and that's an organization that doesn't have anything to do with the company you're in. And over the years, I also switched companies for different reasons over the years. But my longest term relationships have come from knowing people in that organization. And from that organization, we did a lot of service projects. And so Shay, you're talking about your network expands. And like you said, sometimes it's better. I mean, you need to have that network because you never know when you're going to need somebody in that network. But I would say that connections in business, my experience was that I would never have gotten as far or been known or succeeded if I hadn't had those early connections, because from there it expanded to other areas. Our construction company has been a member of the chamber since 1986. I mean, we were real new in 85. And it's just like when we got our first computers in 86, you wonder, do I really need this? Do I really need to be a member of the chamber? Yes, you do, if you're in business. Even if you don't get to all the meetings, even if you don't, participate. I was, because real estate has led us into other areas. My husband and I, with a partner, we also built a commercial building there right near the square. Probably it's McDonough, the town center building. But anyway, there was a time where I owned a retail outlet store in there. And again, I was a member of the Small Business Council through the chamber during those periods back in the early 90s. And so it's the connections that you make that really tell you in your business. And I would definitely recommend that. And also, whatever your field is, get as much education as you can. I'm licensed as an associate broker, which means I've had a lot of education. I also have a CRS designation, which is a certified residential specialist, which only maybe less than 10% of the realtors nationwide have the designation. But with the associate broker license, I could go into management down the road if that's what I choose. But become connected and get educated, know your field so that you can walk into that room with confidence and the background that you need.
Thank you so much, Gloria.
Thank you. This really has been very inspiring, and just looking at the comments that have come through, a lot of great women also making comments. Dr. Thomas from Southern Crescent has been on making comments, and Alethea Barnes, one of our great ambassadors with the chamber. And but kind of as we wrap up, I just wanted to talk about how we can support women-owned businesses, just as a reminder of that it's Women's Equality Day coming up. So support women-owned businesses. Let's use our consumer power to support our female entrepreneurs.
And in addition to that, if you are not already registered to vote as a woman in Henry County or anywhere that you're watching, please let's use our power at the polls. So register to vote if you're not already registered, and encourage anyone that you know who is of age to register to vote. Women fought for decades for the right to vote, and so we don't want to take that for granted. So absolutely do that.
Absolutely. And thank all the women in your life as well too. We depend on our hardworking women, our moms, grandmas, partners, sisters, and friends. Extend grace to other women, and especially, we've all talked about this a little bit, extend grace to yourself. And we do tend to be a little hard on ourselves and other women sometimes, but just thank you so very much for speaking today and talking about where you are in your career, and just thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for asking me.
Absolutely.
Have a great day,
everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us.